Last week we had a very interesting first lecture by Zoe Whitley, an online lecture. And this evening we are very happy that we have a lecture here at SMAC with Simon Njami. Simon, very welcome. Thank you for being here tonight and bring us a lecture this evening. Simon Njami is co-founder of Revue Noire. He's also an independent curator, writer, art critic, and many more. He was artistic director for many biennials. He was for 10 years director for the Bamako Biennial of Photography, 2 times for a Biennial of Dakar, and he was also the co-curator for the first African pavilion at the Venice Biennial in 2007, I think. Just to mention some, because Simon was a curator for many projects, many exhibitions, and I think we can say that Simon has been and is one of the key figures to decenter or recenter the narrative of contemporary art in and from Africa. Simon, I think I can give you the floor. We are looking forward. Simon will talk like 45 minutes, and afterwards we have time for a Q&A.
Well, thank you. I'm happy I was not the first, because this virtual thing drives me crazy. I'd rather see people, even if at times I have the feeling I gave a lecture once 15 years ago in Tehran. It was kind of the same. I can see the foreheads, but I could only see the eyes. So. It's a bit better. So my talk is entitled Curating in Global Times. And when I was thinking about it, I had 2 problems I shall share with you. I was wondering what curating meant, and I was wondering what global times meant. So I put myself in a complicated situation. Well, curating, we have some people dealing with curating studies here. I've been doing my homeworks, and I've seen that at the beginning it meant to manage something, and it has nothing to do with art. It was just managing, and my favorite curator was the guy at Windsor Palace who was in charge of putting off the candles, so the curator of the candles. Then the Catholic, they're always taking everything. They invented the cura. The cura was a little thing that a monk was supposed to take care of. And then, of course, the art critic and whatever storytellers imagine the curating in an artistic sense. And today, when you say to somebody curating, he would think contemporary art. He will forget my friend, the candle curator. Anyway, so global, now that we have established that curating is taking care of candles, and if you look at it, actually, some contemporary artists are like dying candles, some are like bright candles. Anyway, it's just a matter of candles and light, I suppose. As far as globalization, when I was thinking about it, just occurred to me that it was exactly the same thing than universalism. I don't know if you remember, most of you are very young, and I'm an old man, but there's a moment where what they call the century of enlightenment, that moment that gave us all these things, they're the one who invented this new modern form of universality. The problem was that, according to them, universality was Europe. And it's funny that this universality thing was the theory behind colonization, with a great aim. We're going to bring civilization to the rest of the world. They were arrogant, we might think. But is the arrogant over? I'm not sure. So, curating. I heard yesterday by a very informed source that there were 350 churches in Antwerpen. when we say churches, we say religions, different religions. And I have the feeling that curating is a bit like those churches. My notion of curating is not necessarily the notion of curating of somebody else, which is nice, because then it's supposed to give us different approaches, different theories, different ways of curating. But since we're talking about churches, there's something interesting in churches, is that the churchgoers are believers. And when you believe, you don't question. And at times, I had a feeling that this curating world is like a bunch of churches. When people believe, they don't question. As far as I'm concerned, I'll take the credo out. I know you all studied a bit of Latin. And I'll take the cogito. You all remember Pascal's famous say, cogito ergo sum. I can buy that, even if we can discuss it. But what it means is that credo ergo non sum. So all the churchgoers are not because they believe. I'm so happy. I'm coming back from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and I couldn't speak about God, so it's like, indulge me. I'm going to say God is dead, etc., these kind of things, and I could go back home safe. So, curating credo versus, according to me, versus cogito. Now, there's a thing when you're into the credo that, of course, you cannot follow, is this say by Hegel. Hegel said, we don't know what we know. And I think that when we're talking about global circumstances, told you about universality, nowadays you're global when you drink Coca-Cola and when you have an iPhone. I have an iPhone. Nobody's perfect. But this notion of globalization, which means basically that we think the same and we have to go, all of us, by the same rules, whether we're in or we're out. I decided when I fell into that madness that is called curation, I decided to be an outsider, because that's a good position. You're not really a believer, and you can be killed by anyone for your non-beliefs. It was interesting because there's this double binding that I think a contemporary curator should have, is to remember what Hegel was saying, we don't know what we know. I'm not going to lecture you on Hegel. You're all bright people. You all at minimum have a master, some probably PhDs, brilliant, clever people. But we don't know what we know is double sense entrance. There's a humble one and there's the humble one. We don't know what we know might be read as whatever we're saying. We don't know what we're talking about. But the other one that I found more poetic is we might know things that we don't know we know. And in the system that we're living in, we're all supposed to know and we're all supposed to share the same truth, which is boring. Now in contemporary times, 2021, the world has understood everything. We're living in harmony. I consider my friend, French-speaking Belgian, as a brother. If I'm Flemish-speaking and all the way around. I consider when I live in France that all those Arabs that have colonized are my brothers, etc. So imagine if we were not in the ideal world we're living in, somebody like Marine Le Pen or somebody like Eric Zemmour would not be existing. Somebody like the King of Turkey or this guy Orban or even the Russian one, they would not be existing. So there's a problem. I'm saying we're living in an ideal world and I have the feeling that I'm wrong and that there's still the old center. Some of you are too young, but there was a whole discourse about the center and the periphery. And I remembered that I was a kid, I was talking about this bullshit of center and periphery, that what creates a center is a central element, which means that we have a bunch of centers, but they're centers who are stronger, who are able to say that they are the center, and that everything out of that center is satellite. You take art history. People in the Middle East, in Latin America, in Africa are studying art history. But there's a moment not so long ago, and I wonder if it has changed, where art history was exclusive of the biggest part of the world. When somebody says, I'm an art historian, I'm always wondering what history is dealing with. There was this exhibition in the Pompidou Center. The title was Artists Against History. I went to visit the exhibition. I think the most exotic artist there was Spanish. So as a curator, artists against history, are you pretending like Hegel? Because what I love about Hegel is that you can find everything, some decent thing and some very indecent thing. Hegel was saying, 1830, introduction to the course of philosophy of history, was saying that the African continent does not exist. It hasn't reached the civilization. So, some years later, in the 20th century, early 21st century, there was a guy who was making a show called Artists Against History, and there were only European artists. Okay, he included a Spanish one. I cannot blame him, because we're not sure Spain is part of Europe completely. Spain, Portugal, Italy. At times, Italy, we think it's not part of it, but, well, there were Romans, they have all these things, Michelangelo, etc., so it's complicated. But what is interesting with Hegel is that he was saying, except Egypt, Africa, blah, blah, blah. And then I made a show once that was called Africa Remix, and a very clever journalist, a very well-taught, very well-read, came to me and said, Mr. Njami, come on. You call your show Africa Remix, and you invited some Tunisian artists, some Egyptian artists, some Moroccan artists, some Algerian artists. I was young, I thought this guy was making a joke. But he wasn't. He really believed that Morocco was not in Africa, or that Egypt was not in Africa. And I guess there's a bunch of people who still believe that this is how it works. You go to Latin America, I made a lot of friends there. I was giving a lecture in São Paulo. No, actually it was in Salvador de Bahia. I finished my lecture, and there's some Rasta guys, black, etc. Hey, brother, we're so happy you're here because we're African. I told them, no, you're not. It was terrible because they were there to support me, and they didn't. If they could have hanged me, they would have hanged me. And the fact is that they were not African. I mean, they've been gone on a journey 500 years ago. Holidays, they were told. Well, now they speak Brazilian, which is interesting. And I think that the fact that they're speaking Brazilian is exactly what this global moment we're living should be about. Homi Baba, you're all familiar with the post-colonial studies, which is a big joke. But anyway, Homi Baba invented this beautiful word. I hate him for that. It was glocal. And I think that our contemporary time should be glocal. Because when I'm talking, what is interesting, back to the days when you have the Trotskyists, the Maoists, etc., when they would have a discussion, they would say, comrade, from where are you talking? And I think that we're all talking from a place. And it is that place that makes the other places different, more interesting. I love Ghent, but I mean, we should talk to the Burgmeister to make this place funkier. And when I was walking, I was fearing that some ghost would come from there's not a single bar around. There's just this museum that looked like a mausoleum. And we're talking about contemporary art. We're talking about the life. We're talking about today. We're talking about all those marvelous things. And we're right here at night, winter, 6:30. You're like, my goodness, like Frankenstein is somewhere. There'll be some... So we should do something like that. If you need some help for the next meeting, I'll be very happy to help. Because when we talk about contemporaneity, we're talking about speed. We're talking about speed. And if I come back to Paris in 100 years, I won't get lost. But whenever I go to Sao Paulo, I go to Dakar, I go to Shanghai, I'm lost. I'm like, you had a hole there, then you have a building, you have things are speeding. So when we're talking about contemporaneity, when we're talking about curating, the French people, they're so stupid, but at times they have ideas. They have two genres of curators. The one are called the conservateur, the others are called the commissaire. The conservateur is a museum curator. Normally he works with a collection. And if you take the translation of conservateur, it means keeper. It means somebody who's against the movement. Conservateur is somebody who keeps. Curator is somebody who's takes care of candles. And I think that it's better to be taking care of candles. So, the question you're asking me, I haven't heard, but I pretend you've asked it, is how do I position myself as a curator, and how do I face the challenge of a global world? I'll tell you, it's easy. I was very lucky. I was born in Switzerland. Don't laugh. And I spent my childhood there. So, in my blood and my bones, I had an idea of globalization in a positive manner. Because even if I was Swiss, I had the sense that I was not exactly the Swiss that was not a perfect Swiss. But maybe I was the perfect Swiss, and I could help the Swiss to be more Swiss. And, eat some dole instead of eating all this cheese, that it was cheesy, if I can make that bad joke. And then I moved to Paris, and the old Sorbonne just formed me. And actually, when I was teaching in the States, I felt so offended because some of my colleagues say, well, you're from the French school, you're so French. I'm like, me? Come on, I'm Swiss. But I'm Cameroonian as well. But even in Cameroon, I'm not that Cameroonian, I'm Bassa, which is one of the many peoples in Cameroon. So the fact of being able, I think that Sartre should quote an American philosopher. But if you know some, send me names. So Sartre was saying, he was talking about the decolonized, but you can use it for anything. It's like, as long as you don't step aside to look at yourself acting, you're a robot. You take everything for granted. You don't have any kind of critical distance about what you're doing. You say, I'm a European. Your parents told you. You're president when you have one, you're prime minister. So you say, I'm European. You don't question what it really means. And when you go to Latin America, you say, we the Europeans. We don't dance like them. But yet I was in Tokyo. It was an amazing experience. A friend of mine told me, let's go to a salsa club. We all have our preconceptions. I love preconceptions because if we're able to face them, we move them. So I'm like, okay, salsa club in Tokyo, great. We go there. I was young then, and I couldn't. Now when I do that, I have to see my masseur tomorrow. that was too much. We enter there with our my friends, we start to, all of a sudden Japanese start to dance. We stop dancing. I didn't know Japanese could dance salsa that way, but yet they could. And this is the globalization I enjoy, the one where all our preconceptions are invalid. Thanks God, the French are not telling me when I'm giving a lecture there, "Your French is so good." I say, well, okay, it's not my fault, it's the Sorbonne. I don't know why they would give me that kind of compliment. It might sound like an insult. But anyway, I'm amused by all that. So yes, I guess this short biography of mine at least prevented me from pretending that this is the way it is. When I'm told about France that I know very well, I laugh. When I'm talking about it, they say, for instance, the Germans are so precise. Well, they're not that precise. And because they make some interesting cars, they're precise. So the way I curate is an hetero way. I don't like the homo way. No, don't report me on Me Too, whatever. I have a lot of friends who are homosexual. This is the only homo that I can stand. But I don't like the homo because the homo means the same. I like the hetero because it means the different. So curating for me is to use the heterotopia. Well, I'll tell you, I know you all know by heart, but you'll correct me if I'm wrong. It's different location at the same place. The museum is a wonderful example for that, because, or the movie theater. You enter a movie, you watch a movie, you go out, you don't recognize the place, but yet you're in Paris or you're in Ghent, but you're having a trip in a location that uses the heterotopia principle. Michel Foucault wrote a lot about it, not always consistent, but most of the time not so bad. So that's my first hetero. My second hetero is the heterochronia. Because again, I was visiting the show here, and most of the works were from the 60s, mid-60s max. By the way, I've seen some works that were arte povera, and then to pop, we'll have to discuss about that. How do we define pop? But that's another story. But again, you're there and you're back in the 60s when you're in 2021. So heterochrony, the fact of using different times, of mixing different times in the same space. And the last one is the heterology. And again, these are things you can find in the museum, as if museums were constructed for that. But you can find them in the street. You can find them everywhere. Watching television. I don't have television. Watching people, the way they dressed. The Gothic. When the Gothic came, it's a new trend. I said, I had a feeling I've seen that before. So the heterology is to put different logos in the same space. You can bring an artist from the arte povera movement and put him in the pop. That's also the magic of a curator, when the curator can write a bit, is that you tell a story. If your story is valid, you can show whatever you want and explain it. Why do you put this in there? Oh, it's because there's a relationship. Okay. Some are not that good at that, but the curator is somebody who tells stories. He's not an art historian. He can be an art historian without being a curator. Curator tells stories and tries to gather different worlds together. And what I like about the heterology, according to Michel de Certeau, is that heterology is let's call it a science, it's not a science, that allows in a space to bring what is missing. So we're always having the consciousness of what is missing where we are. And when we're trying to do something, we try to bring in what is not there, knowing that eventually what is where we are is missing somewhere. So it's not about questioning the missing. The missing is part of it. It's embracing it. It's to realizing what is missing. When we're building a collection in a very classic way, we're looking for what is missing. If the collection has a purpose, a period in time, say what is missing, let's bring it in. So I think curating, for me at least, is trying to bring in a space what is missing. And of course, bringing something in a space is not necessarily material. It's theoretical. It's for instance, I and my POU students, I was giving a lecture, I don't know where, about philosophy of history, and I quoted a Malian philosopher who is 1830, was giving his lecture on philosophy of history, and I took whatever Hegel said about Africa, and I just changed Africa by Europe. Voila. Because again, the notion of history, I told you about this guy who's doing his show in Beaubourg. History is what? It's a mere construction. Somebody says history is a story told by the winner. Unfortunately, there are places in the world that were not that fascinated by being winners. They didn't even have options. When the first Americans were there and Europeans came, well, they disappeared. And I remember, can you believe, when we're talking about a religion, when I was a kid, I wanted to be the cowboy. You see how this trick can work. My brother Indian was slaughtered, and I wanted to be the one who was slaughtering them. So I guess I would have wanted to be Tarzan. Not really. I didn't like his underwear. Not very sexy. But anyway, this is the way we're trapped into typologies that at the end of the day starting to become truth that we're not questioning. Curating in global times means questioning everything, starting by ourselves, starting by whatever we thought we knew, starting by the history we've been told. I mean, Edouard Glissant wrote an interesting book that can be used, the title can be changed. It was called Our Ancestors, the Goals, the Antilles Problem. I mean, when you're a kid and in your history book, you see Asterix and Obelix and tell you these are your ancestors. You might need to spend time with Freud after that. You discover that there's something wrong with me, and then at the end of the day you discover that there's nothing wrong with you. Something is wrong with your books, with the history you're told. You have a bunch of curators today. Some are friends, some are not. But with all of them we pretend to be friends. You have the international curation tour, good circus. Well, I see you in Venice. Yeah. In Basel, we have a coffee, da-da-dee. And this world is so huge that I see the same ones everywhere. And we're talking about international art. It's like, come on, isn't that something missing? Well, every now and then I have a Latin American friend that I bump into. I have a Japanese friend, but most of the time it's the same guys. And they are the one, well, since I'm in the circus, let's say we are the ones who are deciding what should be worn tomorrow. And we're pretending that we're international and we're taking care of the world. I mean, I was giving a lecture in Colombia, and I asked them to name 10 artists who were essential to them. They didn't name one Colombian. Well, maybe all the Colombian artists are bad, but I know a couple who are decent. The same thing in Africa. They were unable to name an African artist, and so on and so forth. Not to talk about China, where they're not even able to name some Chinese artists. Well, they would name a guy I really love, Ai Weiwei, which is for me, with Jeff Koons, the example of the fall of a civilization. If Jeff Koons have solo shows everywhere, in all the big museums, it's not Jeff's fault. He's invited. Why shouldn't he say no? The problem is that he is invited. And people are putting millions to have him. I mean, in France, for instance, in Beaubourg, when they have a show of young artists, if you're under 55, you cannot enter Beaubourg. And this is the place where blah, blah, blah. I don't know what's the rage here. But at least I heard something yesterday that was very interesting, is that some kids from 6 to 15 had to deal with the collections. I think this is where the thing starts. We're talking about curation, we're talking about museum, we're talking about institution, we're also talking about an audience. How do we bring an audience in a museum? I remember a couple of shows I did in strange places. The director would tell me, oh, thanks to you, Simon, we had 100 Moroccans who entered the museum. So, well, most of the time they have no reason to enter the museum. I mean, it's interesting to have a retrospective of Malevich, but what would my friend from Tangiers want to see Malevich? Nobody ever told him about Malevich. He doesn't really care about Malevich. Why should he? So some people came simply because they heard that there were some Moroccan artists in the show. There was some this and that in the show. So if as curators, international curators, we don't think that nothing human should be stranger to us, and if we don't consider our humanity as something diverse, something scattered, what do we know after all? I'm sure there's some art historian here. We become art historian. Why? Because we have teachers, we have books who are telling us about art history. And at the end, we become PhD, we become teacher. What do we teach? What we're taught. We should reinvent books. We should, and I think this is the key problem today. Because the interesting thing about art, this is where I'm still interested in this madness, is that it's a reflection of so many things. And it could be opening so many doors. Because we're not dealing with weapons, we're not dealing with balls, footballs, we're not dealing with whatever, we're dealing with something that is totally useless. At times I wonder why, with that freedom, we're still refraining ourselves. We're still working their frames. We're still using the same kind of ways of doing the things we're doing. My friend Jean-Hubert Martin did a show once. It was at the Kunstpalast in Düsseldorf. And he wanted to show the collection. It's a bit what you did here. So he invited 5 contemporary artists to expose the collection. Well, all his curators signed a petition to keep him out. Because how can you show Tintoretto with Buren? How can you? This is not how it works. Who decided that there was a way that it works? What I'm interested in is just to see how it doesn't work and to see if it can work. And the problem in curating is not for it to work or not. I mean, I don't give a lecture if I don't have fun. I suffered too much of being on the other side. I don't make a show if I don't have fun. The fact that it works, what do we know? Curating is just an experiment. I know people who are making their show in their office, compiling catalogs and images. At the end, they make a show. Even when the show is open and the artists are invited, they wouldn't even know who is who. And that was before there were masks. So if we're not trying things, I mean, we're kind of lucky, for those who are lucky. We have no money. I'm talking about me. I have no money. I have no institution. I cannot draw. I make shows. And they say, oh, great show. But I mean, let's imagine the artist would be on strike. The institution would refuse to give me the money, etc., etc. I would be the naked king. And I think we should never forget that a curator is nothing but a naked king. He exists because he can produce a music that people can hear. Well, institution is still calling me because the music I'm producing is still heard. Other days not. But again, to try, some artists do that, some curators do that, we all do that, to try to work on a recipe. I did this, it worked. I'm going to do it forever. What's the point? We have to get out of our comfort zone. We have to, at least that's what I'm trying to do, knowing that in any case, even working out of your comfort zone becomes a comfort zone. Because you arrive and say, oh, this is the guy who's working out of the comfort zone, so, which becomes another form of comfort zone. But how do we question the very notion of art? My friend Jean-Hubert Martin tried. He did Les Magiciens de la Terre. And we've been having a 20 years discussion. We decided that we will stop that discussion. But if you look at the show, the only magician were the non-Western artist. He would tell me, who am I to decide if a guy from the Barbados is an artist or not? I told him, you yourself, if I go to the Barbados, I will select artists I think are artists. I'm not going to take a coffin maker and decide that he's a conceptual artist. So the point is that how can we be politically incorrect? Not in a fashionable way, but simply by assuming the I that is deciding of the frame of a show. Assuming the I that decides this is what art is for me, this is what contemporaneity is for me. And not to be like those stupid Africans who are given back some objects. And their first thing, and they're very proud of it, to come to me and say, you know, Mr. Njami, we're building museums. Saying, come on, those things were buried. Those things were not to be put in a glass box, etc. Museum, the people who created that didn't create them for museums. And now that a couple of things, not the most important, are going back to Africa. Those stupid Africans are wasting money constructing a museum when the notion of museum is questionable. But anyway, this is kind of thing. If we don't question what we're doing, the material we're using, and the time we're doing it, I always wonder when I look at something, what would my Colombian friend think about it? And I don't want my Colombian friend to agree with me, because I'm not Colombian. But I want us to have a good fight. And I take something from him. Maybe take something from me. And we're into this heterology. I think basically curating in global times for me is using the three heteros. And to be conscious whenever we're doing something that we might be doing it for the wrong reasons. Doesn't mean that we're not going to produce a wonderful show. But the reason why we're doing this, our notion of quality, our notion of goodness. What is good art? Maybe you'll help me when there's a Q&A. I don't know. I know there's things that are talking to me, things that are not talking to me. And then of course after that I write beautifully, I make people believe that it's wonderful, but maybe it's not. So, curating global times. I don't know if I'm the right person, because I never consider myself as a curator. Because I think curators are, no, it's not sexy enough. I consider myself as a conductor. Well, maybe it's not very modest, but after all. And what does a conductor? And a conductor that composes as well. So I compose music, and then I see who are the best musicians to play it. At times an artist will come to me and say, I don't know why I was not invited in this show. I say, well, because you are not playing the right instrument. It's not because I'm not inviting you that I'm questioning your work. Of course, many times I'm not inviting people there because I'm questioning their works, but to talk about those, I'm not questioning the works. It's just that when you're telling a story, you need to have the right, at least what you think are the right people to tell that story. And this is why I select the artists who are going to tell the story. And I consider making an exhibition as writing a novel. An exhibition is always a fiction. That's why I time with my radical art historian friends who believe that history is not a huge fiction. I have tensions. I say, well, no, Simon, historically you cannot say, who decide? We can reinvent history. I was not there where Napoleon did whatever. All that I have are books. And if you look at the other places, when Christopher Columbus, and I was sold this lie, discovered America. Later on I discovered that he stopped in the West Indies. That was called the West Indies because he thought he was in India. He never set a foot in America. But in all the books, Christopher Columbus discovered America. And now people want me to believe in history. I mean, I did some scholarly work when I was a kid on a French writer who, in an introduction of a novel he wrote, said, this story is true because I have invented it from the beginning to the end. This is the kind of story I like to deal with. Since every history is questionable, I'd rather write one that is totally questionable, and that is assuming the fact that it is not history. It is a novel. So if we don't write novels, you will notice that the wonderful thing about novels is that they never question you were all, or part of you, were all seduced by 100 years of solitude. Written by a Colombian writer who was writing about Colombia and Colombian beliefs. When I read that book, I never set a foot in Colombia, but I made it mine. When I would read Yukio Mishima, I never set a foot in Japan. But I was like, he's telling me a story that I can understand. And this is for me what curating should be. It should not be left in the dangerous hands of specialists. We should open a window. The kids take contemporary artists to deal with history, to take, I would love that to be the next project in a couple of years, to ask Mamadou, Mohammed, and Lee to come here and to visit the collection and to make a show out of it, because they're not supposed to be related to those things. But that would be interesting. Maybe they will just reproduce what an art historian from Europe would do. Maybe not. But then, an exhibition that we don't know when we're in the process of making it is so much interesting than an exhibition that we know. If I start an exhibition, I know when the show is going to open, how it will look like. I have the feeling that I've been cheating some people, but when I don't know it till it opens, then it's interesting. So if we deal with global time, let's become global. let's get out of our routines. Let's admit that in a small little place like Antwerpen, there can be 350 religions represented, which is incredible. But now, religion is a bad example, but let's say people. I hate the word inclusion because we're not including anything. Inclusion means exclusion. Being is something that I can deal with. So we have to be inclusive, we have to take the handicaps, we have to take the deaf, we have to take... I don't want to include. I want to think that I am the other, like Rimbaud put it. It's not that easy to be the other. Again, I was lucky in Lausanne. I knew I was the other. I didn't know exactly the nature of my otherness, but it was obvious that I was the other. In Paris, kind of the other. In the United States, when they insulted me, telling me you're so French, I was the other. So we're always the other somewhere. And I think making an exhibition in global times is confronting oneself with one's own otherness. It's not the others who are other anymore. It's me. So how do I deal with my otherness? Even I think that this is my village, this is my place, this is my city. How do I maneuver inside of this? And this is the only way to kill globalization. We won't be able to kill the great capital. We won't be able to, they ask me to get a vaccine, I take it. I tell it to you because we're in an intimate place, but normally I'm a punk and a radical, but if I cannot travel because I don't have it, well, I'm a stupid. When Trump was president, I told to some friends I won't go to the States before Trump is there. And I say, what the fuck? Trump will not even notice that I didn't come for 5 years. So maybe there are things that can be done there instead of being this stupid radical. But yes, we should try to be as radical as we can. It doesn't mean to burn the Eiffel Tower. It just means to wonder every now and then, why are we doing what we're doing? I created a magazine that was called Revue Noire, and one day a journalist came to ask questions. Say, what's the aim of Revue Noire? And my answer was, the aim of Revue Noire is the end of Revue Noire. So, excuse me? Well, it took half an hour, but you understood immediately. Because the end of Revue Noire would mean that we didn't need to be there. And then we'd have to reinvent ourselves and to find other ways. We're talking about the first African pavilion in Venice. Well, it's still so far the first. My intuition when we did it was that it was the last as well. Well, so far there haven't been any African pavilion. But again, journalists came and said, well, Mr. Njami, you're doing it again. You have Basquiat, you have Warhol, you have Barceló, you have all those people, Alfredo Yard. They're not African. I said, well, I never said I was making a show with Africans. The pavilion is African. The pavilion is just a space where I distributed passports to people. So again, on a very simple thing, the African pavilion, people went to believe that it was a pavilion filled with Africans, when it was just a space. And it's a very welcoming continent. Actually, all the continents are very welcoming, except of Europe, of course, that you know. But most of the continent are very welcoming. They're welcoming the other. We don't. I can play that game because I play with my passport according to the place where I am. I will say we, I will say you. It's easy, but well, why not having some easy pleasures every now and then? Curating is always having some easy pleasures. We're not going to change the world. We're not, I did this show and I was confronting the Marxist it a good show? Did the people enjoy it? They can check marks after. But we're not there for people to be lectured when they're looking at a show. And that's why the test is the taxi driver. Invite a taxi driver in a very, something you think is a complex show. If the taxi driver can tell you about it, it's a decent show. If he can't, then it's a show that's not worth being made. Because when you're talking about globalization, we look very far. That Ghent is a place of potentially globalization. There's a lot of universities, there's a lot of schools, so it means that there's a lot of people in this tiny little place already. We could start there. I'd be curious to know how is the attendance of this museum? Who's been making a lot of efforts? What is the attendance? Who are the people coming among the 100,000 a year who are coming? These are the things interesting. What do we do for them? And I hate the notion of doing things for them, because at the end of the day, it's what do we do for us? And again, we're lucky. It's a playground. I did show in strange places where the situation was terrible, but it was just a show. I was not a journalist saying, fuck the president, whatever, so it was fine. Painting, sculpture, joke, not important. So that gives a power, the fact of playing in a useless field. And insist on the uselessness, because the uselessness is freed from the capital. We're doing things because we think we have to do them. We're not paid for that. Well, we have a salary. I have a huge honorarium, but it's not the point. We're doing it because we think it's worth doing. And we should always bear that in mind, that what we're doing is not important. And this is why it's so important. I would love to have a nice Q&A session. How long I've been talking? 50? Jesus Christ. Okay, then let's start. I just thought that I had notes that I had to read in case, but forgot to read them. So, okay, let's start the Q&A. I need to have some tea because my throat is a bit... Since we're in a circle of confidence and brotherhood, my tea is an Italian wine, a Chianti. Now again, talking about fiction, you're not sure it's really wine. Maybe I'm making it up. My birth made Swiss more Swiss. And there's a story I don't tell, so it's a secret. If you repeat it, I don't know where it's coming from. My father, when I was born, sued the Swiss Confederation because of my name. He wanted to give me the name, his grandfather, his grand-grandfather, the way we do it in the Bassa people. And of course, the officer there said, no, this is his name, this is his name. My father sued them and he won. It was just a professor, it was nothing, but he said, no, you're not going to impose upon me what you cannot impose upon me, because this is how it's been doing for centuries, for millennium in my family, so it's going to do like that. So yeah, and not me directly, but I think my father, for instance, helped Switzerland to be more Swiss. it's very simple. I mean, they belong to whom? To Francesco or to the city? Depends. I mean, we can do in Holland, in places. There are churches that became nightclubs. There are churches that became things. I think we have to revitalize the things in what is needed today. We have empty spaces. Let's fill them with what is needed today. I mean, churches are nice. They're solid. They're there for long. So I think we should reuse them in different manners. And it's done at times. I'm doing something in Naples in an old church. And I'm doing things about spirituality, but of a strange manner. So it's so nice to be in a place that have been desacralized, that is still there physically, architecturally, and then all of a sudden something different is happening inside. We're dealing with this, the three hetero, and doing something in a church that the church would not necessarily like. But again, the point is not to do something just to do something, to do something that makes sense. And I think churches are nice spaces. I don't know. I mean, I guess a swimming pool, that could be something interesting. A church, definitely. Oh, geographically, everywhere. But I've conducted everywhere. But I like to conduct. There's something, for instance, that I've learned. I did a show that toured around the world, and I discovered that it was not the same show. Because in Tokyo, the question and the approach would be different. In Sweden, it would be different, etc. It's also a way to get out of what we think we know. I did a show, and then all of a sudden, the show was different in different locations. But geographically, anywhere, I have no geographical problem. I guess the Middle East, when I'm preparing something, would be an interesting church to curate. And, because I'm a punk, but I hate prison. So the question would be, how do you negotiate with whatever is there and say whatever you want to say without ending up in a jail? So these are the kind of interesting challenges, to try to say something in a place where you have to change your vocabulary. You have to know where you are. Something important to me is that when you're doing a show somewhere, before I check the museum, I check the place. Who's living there? How are the forces? And then I make the show. Because if not, it doesn't make sense to have a ready-made thing that you can put here and there if it doesn't resonate with the people around. So yes, the most challenging, because they would force me to rethink the notion of curation, the notion of an exhibition, etc., are the places where it might be problematic. But again, I take the problem as an intellectual one and not as a physical one. I cannot stand a minute in a bad restaurant. I couldn't stand a second in a bad prison. So I would make sure I'm not in a prison, but say something. I think one of the things that might bore us is precisely the lack of challenge. Because we're talking among ourselves. I was in Italy once, and Berlusconi was no more the prime minister, and there was a pool that giving 60% to Berlusconi. And I asked my friend, I don't understand, 100% of the people I know in Italy are against this guy. He told me, how many percentage you 100 represent in Italy? So we're always in spaces where we kind of all agree because we're talking more or less the same language, we agree. Even when we disagree, we don't really disagree, but to be in a place of disagreement, fundamental disagreement, that would be interesting. Well, I start to live that. There's one thing Fellini was saying, that there's a reporter who is there talking about his life, and the reporter comes and says, "Maestro, I want to know what is your daily life. It must be fantastic." And Fellini said, "Well, I wake up, take a coffee at home or outside, I read the newspapers, and I come back, have lunch, and the journalist said, "No, where's all the movies you've been making?" He said, "No, you're asking me about my daily life." And then he said, "Well, when I have a contract with a producer, then it's fireworks, da-da-da-da-da." But I think, to make this bad metaphor, there's a boring part in the process. I'm amused, but it's boring, the writing, the selecting, the ba-ba-ba. But then, there's this moment where you have to dance with the place. So we're on the plan. I hate plans, but you have to do it. This will be there, this will be there, and then the works are there, and like this cannot be there. Well, they always manage, but all the workers at the beginning, they were not really happy with me, because you have this thing that is 500 kilos. You said, "This is where it has to be." You said, "No, finally, no, it has to go there." And I think this is where the show takes place. This is also where the artists are there. It's one thing to talk to them, to be in the studios, then you're in that space where things are going to happen. An exhibition is, first of all, something in a space. You can talk about it for 100 years as long as you're not in the space, confronting with the walls, with because at times there's some architects who think that the work is them. So you're like, okay, thank you, the architect. How are we going to put some works in this work? So that's the funniest part, and it's really fun because you see the huge mistakes you've been making, and of course you have long nights times, and that's where it comes alive. Other than that, it's just a theory. The same for everyone. When an artist comes to me and say, "Simon, I have this wonderful concept," I say, "Come later, when it's done." Because what can we say about a concept? It can be beautiful, it can be, then the results say, okay. So that's really, and it's really fun. And again, we should not confuse fun with something else. It's not easy. You're like, "No, this is not the way that I need it." Well, I had this experience in Japan where I was starting to get very nervous with my first show in Japan. I'm talking about the light, and there's a guy there who's just touching a computer. I'm telling it to this translator, I'm talking, this guy's not listening. And at the end, when we finish, the guy just pressed a button. "Is it that?" I'm like, "Shit, he got me." I said, "No, but please, have to. I would like you to add a bit of intensity." Well, because I was coming for places, no, a bit of this. The guy was just boom, boom, boom. I was like, the guy, I don't know, he's in his social account or whatever when I'm trying to talk to him. But no, it's fun. I mean, it's fun when you're there, and I guess for anyone it's the same when you see it. And it's only when you see it that you realize the limitation of it. You see the mistakes, you see a concept is perfect until you start to apply it. And Deleuze, when he was talking about concept and toolbox, he said a theory must be applicable. If not, this theory is useless, and the iteration as well. Yeah, first of all, I didn't call them the instrument. I call them the instrumentist, the musicians. It's different because anyone can use an instrument. But then, and again, I take that metaphor because, you know, about the music. When I do a quartet, when I do a piece with piano and orchestra and a symphony, it's not the same musician. It's not the same spirit. And well, I've known artists for a while, very well. I like to know artists very well, and there are artists I just met. I'm doing a show, and the music is there, and I bump into a kid. I say, he could work in the thing, but I'm not suicidal. I always have a hardcore of people who I know, and always try to have very old and very young, and in the middle, because then the young that nobody would go and see will be seen because of the guy in the middle or the guy in the end, etc. And then there will become, and then to create also different ranges of music. How would somebody who's been raised into hip-hop play a symphony? These are the kind of things I'm interested in. But yes, I want to know the artist. Well, I've known them for a while, but when I meet them, and I think we might dance together, we continue. And there's something I want to insist on. I don't talk very much about art with the artists I know. Talk about life, about wine, about whatever, because the art is there. I remember some years ago, I would visit some studios of young artists. I say, okay, thank you. I say, well, Mr. Njami, you have nothing to say? I said, no. I came to see, I've seen. Okay, we can sit and chit-chat and say, you know, I use this color, but what's the point? I have to digest, and if there's a conversation to have, there's a conversation. I hate talkative artists. Some know exactly why they did what they did, and blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, maybe there should be galleries or teachers, not artists. It is too perfect. Yeah, I learn more about the favorite books an artist is reading, if ever read books or his music and things, rather than when he talks about his work. And the work is there for me to see. And then if I have questions, I could ask questions, but I don't want this salesman to tell me everything about it. When it's too perfect, it stinks. I don't know if I answered your question. But I'll say I'm an old man. I'll take it.
Which kind of advice would you give to the colleagues and conservators in this globalization era?
I hate to give advices because this is how churches start. And the only thing is that do it for yourself. I mean, again, the only thing, but I guess they're all doing it, is when you say I, ask yourself who is the I who's talking. And we might disagree, we might agree, but that's the only thing. To try, no matter what, to tell the story you want to tell, instead of telling the story you think people want to hear, or the story you paid to do. You know, at times institutions are their policies, the buyers are the policies, the cities, the policies. How do they negotiate to still be I in all this? That's all. But I mean, if you had to have an easy life, just do as you're told, and you'll live long, and maybe nobody will remember you, but at least you'll be making shows, etc. I mean, yeah, for me, it's like when we talk about artists, an artist is just the other guy who's expressing himself through art. But the plumber is the other guy who's expressing himself. So nothing special. The curator is just the other guy who makes shows. So everybody should do his job as honestly as possible. That's why, again, the notion of goodness is something that I don't buy. I've seen shows that I found a bit funky, a bit whatever, but I like them because I could see what was there. I've seen perfect shows, and after the second room I was sleeping. I could add something, is like we should always bear in mind that we are in the year 2021. And we're living in a village that is called the world. That's the only thing to keep in mind. And to make a show only with Flemish artists, but having in mind that we're in 2021 and the village is the world, would change the thing. The point is not to do Vlaams and not to do this and that. It's just, how do we do it? Because Vlaams, what is it? It's nothing. So at times we can get money because we have to have Vlaams, but then we can play with it. There's a year where Pascal Martin Taillou received some money from the Vlaams as a representative of the Vlaams in Venice. It was really funny. He called me and said, I'm Vlaams now. but whatever works, but not for sell something, but whatever works for you. So there's no crime as using the money, well, as long as it didn't kill anyone, but then use it wisely, because I hear people, well, you're doing a show there, this money is dirty. So where is money not dirty? I mean, it's up to us to be dirty or not. The money, well, at times it stinks, then we don't take it, but most of the time it stinks. But how can you make a show with that money? I'm not that radical. A last question, you're all exhausted, but maybe a last question. My tea is getting dry. No, that's the point. Thank you for it's not as a curator. I'm using whatever as a human. It happens that I'm called a curator. But doesn't make a difference. The last project I did was in Abu Dhabi, and it was called A Kind of Blue. So it was Miles Davis, and for me this distinction is very weird. The fine arts, I mean, thanks God, the contemporary world, I've been putting that together. I wrote a film once when I said that cinema was invented in Africa 1,000 years before Jesus Christ. And I was just saying that all the rituals were movie. The only thing that was missing was something to record. But, I mean, the people were dressed, they had masks, there was a choreography, there was music, there was all these things. So music is, when I'm writing and I make stop, I listen to music. I mean, I'm so Afro-centered, and most of the time it's Johann Sebastian Bach. I think in the structure, in the metric, in the counter rhythm, the contrepoint, etc., etc. It's every curator should listen to Bach, because precisely you have the question and answer. You have all sorts of things going on there. Of course, in a lot of music, in Kind of Blue, that's the thing. And what I liked about Kind of Blue, and goes back to conducting, is the fact that you cannot have an improvisation if you don't have the best musicians. So Kind of Blues, which is this cult album, Perfection, when they came to record, Miles gave them 3 lines. Say, let's go. And you cannot do that if you don't have great musicians. So I consider the show also as an improvisation, because you never know how things are going to respond. But if you don't have great musicians, the impro will have holes. Yes?
Thank you very much for your very great lecture. Actually, it's not to disrupt your analysis of different theories, especially in music, because you said about Miles Davis. Tell us about your country. I mean, composer, one of the band of Gula stuff. I'm in relation with the great American jazz composers. Just to bring you back to your home country, to your homeland.
Remember that my homeland is Switzerland, and we're not the best musicians in the world. Well, we can do piano. But now, the secret about A Kind of Blue is that this music was created by the blue note. And you know where the blue note is coming from. The people from my homeland was transported there. They wanted to play their music, but the grid that they had was not satisfying to them. So they invented the blue note. And the blue note created the blues and the jazz, etc., etc. So, you're telling me about my homeland? Well, it is my homeland. It came from there. And the biggest metaphor was precisely, I was talking about the glocal of Homi Bhabha, is that Africa invented that. Of course, it took them time to go there and to... the thing is that Picasso was saying, I don't have the color blue, I use the red. And that what is missing, to go back to heterology, is what allows us to find something that would be equivalent. And if we are in our comfort zone, we would not need to create the blue note, because we'd have what we need. So I found this cross-fertilization interesting. At times it's joyful, at times it's painful, But there's always a moment where the human being has to find the resources to survive. And it gives always a beautiful result. I think this is it, folks.
Okay, Simon, before I get you a warm cup of tea, I want to thank you very much for this interesting evening. A lot of food of thought, I think. A lot of food for thought, and thank you very much.
Thank you for coming in these strange times, and at times even taking your mask away. Maybe tomorrow you'll all be contaminated. So it was a very courageous move for culture and for, defending ideas. Thank you.